Good morning and welcome back to Reading Wikis for You, where we read the wiki articles for you. Now, today I'm going to be trying something a little bit different. This is actually an additional video where I'm going to actually start covering current event topics. Now, these are not going to come out every day like my regular videos. Basically, they'll come out as I feel they're warranted, if there's big news events, things like that. We'll cover those particular topics. And today we're going to be talking about Nicolás Maduro because of the recent United States actions to arrest him. Now, I'm not going to be providing any editorial, my personal commentary. I'm literally just reading the article as it appears on the day of recording. So let me know what you think down in the comments. Is this something that you want to see more of? Should we, are there particular topics that, you'd just like some more background information on? Please put that down in the comments and let me know what you'd like to hear more about, and we'll see if we can work that into the schedule. So, with that said, let's go ahead and get started. Nicolás Maduro Moros is a Venezuelan politician and former union leader who served as the president of Venezuela from 2013 until his de facto removal of power by the United States in 2026 following his capture and extraction from the country. He served as the vice president under President Hugo Chavez from 2012 to 2013 and Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2006 to 2012. Starting as a bus driver, Maduro rose to become a trade union leader before being elected to the National Assembly in 2000. A member of the United Socialist Party, he was appointed to a number of positions under Chavez, serving as president of the National Assembly, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and as vice president under Chavez. Maduro assumed the presidency after Chavez's death and won the 2013 special presidential election. He ruled Venezuela by decree after 2015 through powers granted to him by the ruling party legislature. Shortages in Venezuela and decreased living standards led to a wave of protests in 2014 that escalated into daily marches nationwide, repression of dissent, and a decline in Maduro's popularity. An opposition-led National Assembly was elected in 2015, and a movement toward recalling Maduro began in 2016, which was ultimately canceled by Maduro's government. Maduro maintained power through the Supreme Tribunal, the National Electoral Council, and the military. The Supreme Tribunal stripped the elected National Assembly of power and authority, resulting in a constitutional crisis and another wave of protests in 2017. In response to the protests, Maduro called for a rewrite of the Constitution, and the Constituent Assembly of Venezuela was elected in 2017 under voting conditions that many concluded were irregular. In 2018, Maduro was re-elected and sworn in with widespread condemnation. The president of the National Assembly, Juan Guaidó, was declared interim president by the opposition legislative body, starting a presidential crisis that spanned nearly 4 years and divided the international community. In 2024, Maduro ran for a third term in an election which the Maduro-aligned CNE claimed he won without providing evidence, starting another political crisis. Vote tallies gathered by the opposition showed that their candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez, had won the most votes. In November 2025, Maduro was designated as a member of a foreign terrorist organization by the United States. Maduro was widely considered to be leading an authoritarian government characterized by electoral fraud, human rights abuses, corruption, and severe economic hardship. Between 2013 and 2023, Venezuela dropped 42 places in the Press Freedom Index. According to estimates by the United Nations and Human Rights Watch, under Maduro's administration, thousands of people have died in extrajudicial killings, and 7 million Venezuelans were forced to flee the country. The UN fact-finding mission on Venezuela concluded that the country's justice system independence had declined. The mission also identified frequent due process violations, including political external interference, and the admission of evidence through torture was alleged. Most Venezuelan television channels are controlled by the state, and information unfavorable to the government is not covered completely. In 2018, a board designated by the Organization of American States alleged that crimes against humanity have been committed in Venezuela during Maduro's presidency. In 2021, the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court announced the opening of an investigation regarding the situation in the country. Maduro denies all allegations of misconduct and argues the United States has conspired against Venezuela to manufacture a crisis as a means of enabling them to make the case for regime change. On 3 January 2026, Maduro and his wife were captured by U.S. forces. They were then transported to the Metropolitan Detention Center, Brooklyn, where they remain incarcerated, with Maduro expected to be arraigned in a Manhattan court in the next week. Early and personal life. Nicolás Maduro Moros was born on 23 November 1962 in Caracas, into a working-class family. His father, Nicolás Maduro Garcia, was a prominent trade union leader and a militant dreamer of the Movimiento Electoral del Pueblo, and died in a motor vehicle accident on 22 April 1989. His mother, Teresa de Jesus Moros, was born in Cúcuta, a Colombian border town at the boundary with Venezuela. Maduro was raised in Calle 14, at a street in Los Jardines El Valle, a working-class neighborhood in the western outskirts of Caracas. The only male of 4 siblings, he had 3 sisters, Maria Teresa, Josefina, and Anita. Maduro was raised Catholic. In 2012, it was reported by the New York Times that he was a follower of Indian Hindu guru Satya Sai Baba and previously visited the guru in India in 2005. In a 2013 interview, Maduro stated that his grandparents were Jewish, from a Sephardic Moorish background, and converted to Catholicism in Venezuela. Maduro has been married twice. His first marriage was to Adriana Guerra Angulo, with whom he had his only son, Nicolás Maduro Guerra, also known as Nicolásito, who was appointed to several senior government posts. Chief of the Presidency's Special Inspectors Body, head of the National Film School, and is a deputy to the National Assembly of Venezuela. In July 2013, he married Celia Flores, a lawyer and politician who replaced Maduro as president of the National Assembly in August 2006, when he resigned to become Minister of Foreign Affairs, becoming the first woman to serve as president of the National Assembly. The two had been in a romantic relationship since the 1990s, when Flores was Hugo Chávez's lawyer following the 1992 Venezuelan coup d'etat attempts, and were married months after Maduro became president. While they have no children together, Maduro has 3 stepchildren from his wife's first marriage, to Walter Ramon Gavidia, Walter Jacob, Yosvel, and Yosser. Maduro is a fan of John Lennon's music and his political activism for peace and against war. Maduro has said that he was inspired by the music and counterculture of the 60s and 70s, mentioning Robert Plant and Led Zeppelin. Early career. Education and union work. Maduro attended a public high school, the Liceo José Ávalos in El Valle. His introduction to politics was when he became a member of his high school student union. According to school records, Maduro did not graduate from high school. Maduro worked as a bus driver for many years in the Caracas Metro Company. He founded an unofficial trade union at the company, which had banned unions at the time. He was also employed as a bodyguard for José Vicente Rangel during Rangel's unsuccessful 1983 presidential campaign. At the age of 24, Maduro was living in Havana after being sent by the Socialist League to attend a 1-year course at the Escuela Nacional de Cuadros Julio Antonio Mela, a political training center directed by the Union of Young Communists. According to Carlos Peñalosa Zambrano, during Maduro's time in Cuba, he was instructed by Pedro Miret Prieto, a senior member of the Politburo of the Communist Party of Cuba, who was close to Fidel Castro. MBR 200. According to Carlos Peñalosa Zambrano, Maduro was allegedly tasked by the Castro government to serve as a mole working for the Cuba's Dirección de Inteligencia to approach Hugo Chavez, who was experiencing a burgeoning military career. In the early 1990s, he joined MBR 200 and campaigned for the release of Chavez while he was jailed for his role in the 1992 Venezuelan coup d'etat attempts. In the late 1990s, Maduro was instrumental in founding the movement of the Fifth Republic, which supported Chavez in his run for president in 1998. National Assembly. Maduro was elected on the MVR ticket to the Venezuelan Chamber of Deputies in 1998, to the National Constituent Assembly in 1999, and finally to the National Assembly in 2000, at all times representing the Capital District. He was elected as president of the National Assembly of Venezuela, a role he held from 2005 until 2006. Foreign Minister of Venezuela. Maduro was appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs in 2006 and served under Chavez in that position until being appointed Vice President of Venezuela in October 2012 after the presidential elections. According to BBC Mundo, during Maduro's tenure as foreign minister, quote, he was considered a key player in pushing the foreign policy of his country beyond Latin American borders to approach almost any government that rivaled the United States, unquote. Venezuela's foreign policy stances during his term included ending relations with Taiwan in favor of the People's Republic of China, support for Libya under Muammar Gaddafi, breaking off diplomatic ties with Israel during the 2008-2009 Gaza war, recognizing and establishing diplomatic relations with the State of Palestine, a turnaround in relations with Colombia in 2008 and again in 2010, recognizing Abkhazia and South Ossetia as independent states, and support for Bashar al-Assad during the Syrian civil war. Tamir Porras, a 2019 visiting professor at Paris Institute of Political Studies, who was Maduro's chief of staff during his tenure as foreign minister, said that in the early days of Chavismo, Maduro was considered pragmatic and a very skilled politician who was good at negotiating and bargaining. According to Rory Carroll, Maduro did not speak any foreign languages while serving as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. 2006 detention in New York. In New York City in September 2006, while attempting to travel back to Venezuela via Miami, Maduro was briefly detained by the United States Department of Homeland Security officers at the John F. Kennedy International Airport for around 90 minutes, after paying for 3 airline tickets in cash. Both Maduro and President Hugo Chavez were in New York City attending the 61st session of the UN General Assembly, where President Chavez was called U.S. President George W. Bush the Devil during his speech. The incident began when Maduro tried to pick up an item that had been screened at a security checkpoint at the airport, and security personnel told Maduro that he was prohibited from doing so. Maduro later identified himself as a diplomat from the Venezuelan government, but officials still escorted him to a room to conduct a secondary screening. At one point, authorities ordered Maduro and other Venezuelan officials to spread their arms and legs to be frisked, but Maduro and others forcefully refused. His diplomatic passport and ticket were retained for a time, but eventually returned. Speaking at the Venezuelan mission to the UN after his release, Maduro said his detention by the U.S. authorities was illegal and he filed a complaint at the United Nations. U.S. and UN officials called the incident regrettable, but said Maduro had been identified for secondary screening. Homeland Security spokesman Russ Knock claimed that Maduro was not mistreated, saying that there was no evidence of abnormalities during the screening process. Maduro said the incident prevented him from traveling home on the same day. When he was informed of the incident, President Chavez said Maduro's detention was retaliation for his own speech at the UN General Assembly, and stated that the authorities detained Maduro over his links to the Venezuelan failed coup in 1992, a charge that President Chavez denied. Vice President of Venezuela. Prior to his appointment to the vice presidency, Maduro had been chosen by Chavez in 2011 to succeed him in the presidency if he were to die from cancer. This choice was made due to Maduro's loyalty to Chavez and because of his good relations with other Chavistas such as Elias Hawa, former minister Jesse Chacon, and Jorge Rodriguez. Bolivarian officials predicted that following Chavez's death, Maduro would have political difficulties and that Venezuela would experience instability. On 13 October 2012, Chavez appointed Maduro vice president of Venezuela shortly after Chavez's victory in that month's presidential election. On 8 December 2012, Chavez announced that his recurring cancer had returned and that he would be returning to Cuba for emergency surgery and further medical treatment. Chavez said that should his condition worsen and a new presidential election be called to replace him, Venezuelans should vote for Maduro to succeed him. This was the first time that Chavez named a potential successor to his movement, as well as the first time he publicly acknowledged the possibility of his death. Chavez's endorsement of Maduro sidelined Diosdado Cabello, a former vice president and powerful Socialist Party official with ties to the armed forces, who had been widely considered a top candidate to be Chavez's successor. After Maduro was endorsed by Chavez, Cabello immediately pledged loyalty to both men. Interim president. Upon the death of Hugo Chavez on 5 March 2013, Maduro assumed the powers and responsibilities of the president. He appointed Jorge Arreaza to take his place as vice president. Since Chavez died within the first 4 years of his term, the Constitution of Venezuela stated that a presidential election had to be held within 30 days of his death. Maduro was unanimously chosen as the Socialist Party's candidate in the election. When he assumed temporary power, opposition leaders argued that Maduro violated Articles 229, 231, and 233 of the Venezuelan Constitution by assuming power over the President of the National Assembly. Presidency. The succession to the presidency of Maduro in 2013, according to Corrales and Penfold, was due to multiple mechanisms established by Maduro's predecessor, Chavez. Initially, oil prices were high enough for Maduro to maintain necessary spending for support, specifically with the military. Foreign ties that were established by Chavez were also used by Maduro as he applied skills that he had learned while serving as a foreign minister. Finally, the PSUV and government institutions aligned behind Maduro, and the regime used the institutions of repression and autocracy, also created under Chavez, to become more repressive vis-a-vis the opposition. In April 2013, Maduro was elected president, narrowly defeating opposition candidate Enrique Capriles with just 1.5% of the vote, separating the two. Capriles demanded a recount, refusing to recognize the outcome as valid. Maduro was inaugurated as president on 19 April after the Election Commission had promised a full audit of the election results. In October 2013, he announced the creation of a new agency, the Vice Ministry of Supreme Happiness, to coordinate social programs. Opposition leaders in Venezuela delivered a May 2016 petition to the National Electoral Council calling for a recall referendum with the populace to vote on whether to remove Maduro from office. On 5 July 2016, the Venezuelan intelligence service detained 5 opposition activists involved with the recall referendum, with 2 other activists of the same party, Popular Will, also arrested. After delays in verification of the signatures, protesters alleged the government was intentionally delaying the process. The government, in response, argued the protesters were a part of a plot to topple Maduro. On 1 August 2016, the CNE announced that enough signatures had been validated for the recall process to continue. While opposition leaders pushed for the recall to be held before the end of 2016, allowing a new presidential election to take place, the government vowed a recall would not occur until 2017, ensuring the current vice president would potentially come to power. In May 2017, Maduro proposed the 2017 Venezuelan Constituent Assembly election, which was later held on 30 July 2017 despite wide international condemnation. The United States sanctioned Maduro following the election, labeling him as a dictator, preventing him from entering the United States. Other nations, such as China, Russia, and Cuba, offered their support to Maduro in the Constituent Assembly elections. The presidential elections, whose original electoral date was scheduled for December 2018, was subsequently pulled ahead to 22 April before being pushed back to 20 May. Analysts describe the poll as a show election, with the elections having the lowest voter turnout in the country's democratic era. Beginning 6 months after being elected, Maduro was given the power to rule by decree by the pre-2015 Venezuelan legislature and later by the Supreme Tribunal to address the ongoing economic crisis in Venezuela, with strong condemnation by the Venezuelan opposition claiming that the legislature's power had been usurped by the court. His presidency has coincided with a decline in Venezuela's socioeconomic status, with crime, inflation, poverty, and hunger increasing. Analysts have attributed Venezuela's decline to both Chavez and Maduro's economic policies, while Maduro has blamed speculation and economic warfare waged by his political opponents. A 2018 Amnesty International report accused Nicolás Maduro's government of committing some of the worst human rights violations in Venezuela's history. The report found the violence was carried out especially in Venezuela's poor neighborhoods and included 8,292 extrajudicial executions carried out between 2015 and 2017. In 1 year, 22% of homicides were committed by security forces. Amnesty International's Erica Guevara Rosas said, "The government of President Maduro should guarantee the right to life instead of taking the lives of the country's young people." Unquote. During the latter years of Maduro's presidency, pro-government police and military forces launched the Liberation of the People operation, which they stated targeted street gangs and non-state paramilitary formations, which they alleged had taken control of poor neighborhoods. The operations reportedly resulted in thousands of arrests and an estimated 9,000 deaths, while the Venezuelan opposition's claiming that the operations are actually a state instrument of repression. The UN released a report condemning the violent methods of the operation. Although the Venezuelan government's ombudsman, Tarek William Saab, has admitted that his office received dozens of reports of police excesses, he defended the need for the operations and stated that his office would be working alongside the police and the military to safeguard human rights. The Venezuelan Foreign Ministry has criticized the UN report, calling it, quote, neither objective nor impartial, unquote, and listed what it believed were a total of 60 errors in the report. On 4 August 2018, At least 2 drones armed with explosives detonated in the area where Maduro was delivering an address to military officers in Venezuela. The Venezuelan government claims that the event was a targeted attempt to assassinate Maduro, though the cause and intention of the explosion is debated. Others have suggested the incident was a false flag operation designed by the government to justify repression of opposition in Venezuela. In 2019, Porras, Maduro's former chief of staff, said that Maduro, quote, delivered practically nothing in terms of public policy, in terms of direction, unquote, during his first term because in Porras' opinion, quote, he does not have a clear vision for the country. He is very much focused on consolidating his power among his own peers in Chavismo, and much less on exercising or implementing a strategic vision for the country, unquote. Following increased international sanctions during the Venezuelan crisis in 2019, the Maduro government abandoned socialist policies established by Chavez, such as price and currency controls, which resulted in the country seeing a rebound from economic decline. The Economist wrote that Venezuela had also obtained extra money from selling gold, both from illegal mines and from its reserves, and narcotics. On 3 May 2020, Venezuelan security forces prevented an attempt to overthrow Maduro by armed Venezuelan dissidents. The attempt was organized by an American private security company, Silvercorp USA, headed by Jordan Goudreau, and the men were trained in Colombia. Goudreau claimed the operation had involved 60 troops, including 2 former U.S. Special Forces members. The Venezuelan government claimed the United States and its Drug Enforcement Administration were responsible for the operation and had support from Colombia. Juan Guaido denied involvement in the operation. Goudreau claimed that Guaido and 2 political advisors had signed a contract with him for $213 million in October 2019. 8 of the attackers were killed, and 13 more, including 2 Americans, were captured. In October 2020, Maduro was indicted by a U.S. federal court accused of narco-terrorism and conspiracy to import cocaine to the United States. In August 2025, the United States Department of Justice raised the reward for the arrest of Maduro to U.S. $50 million. The U.S. began a series of escalating actions, including the 10 December 2025 seizure of the oil tanker Skipper in international waters off the Venezuelan coast. In October 2025, it was reported that the United States allegedly attempted to capture Maduro through a covert operation involving an effort to recruit his personal pilot, General Bittner Villegas. According to the Associated Press, U.S. Homeland Security agent Edwin Lopez met Villegas in the Dominican Republic and offered him wealth in exchange for diverting Maduro's aircraft to a location where U.S. authorities could legalize his arrest, who faced narco-terrorism charges. Over the following 16 months, Lopez maintained encrypted contact with the pilot, but the plan failed when Villegas refused to cooperate. The plot originated from an April 2024 tip about Maduro's planes, which were later seized in Santo Domingo for sanctions violations. In 2025, after Lopez's final attempts to persuade Villegas collapsed, allies of the Venezuelan opposition publicized the agent's contact with the pilot, briefly sparking speculation about Villegas' fate before he reappeared publicly affirming his loyalty to Maduro. On 24 November 2025, the Trump administration officially labeled him and his government allies as members of a foreign terrorist group. On 3 January 2026, during the United States strikes on Venezuela, Donald Trump said Maduro had been captured by the United States along with his wife. Legal experts believe it is likely a violation of the UN Charter's Article 2, Section 4, which requires respect for other countries' sovereignty and prohibits the use of military force without UN authorization except for self-defense. International relations. On 6 March 2014, marking the 1-year anniversary of Hugo Chávez's death, Maduro announced on live television that he was breaking diplomatic and commercial relations with Panama after the country's president, Ricardo Martinelli, expressed support for the demonstrators during the protests that began on 12 February and called on the OAS to investigate. Relations were later restored in July 2014 after Vice President Jorge Araiza attended the inauguration of President Juan Carlos Varela. On 11 August 2017, U.S. President Donald Trump said that he is not going to rule out a military option to confront the government of Maduro. On 23 January 2019, Maduro announced that Venezuela was breaking ties with the United States following Trump's announcement of recognizing Juan Guaido, the Venezuelan opposition leader, as the interim president of Venezuela. Another diplomatic crisis with Panama occurred in 2018 after the Panamanian government imposed sanctions on Maduro and several key officials of the Bolivarian government. Venezuela responded by imposing reciprocal sanctions on Panamanian companies and as well as prominent Panamanian officials, including President Juan Carlos Varela. The diplomatic crisis ended on 26 April 2018 when President Maduro announced that he had called President Varela and agreed to the return of the ambassadors and the return of air communication between both countries. On 14 January 2019, days after Brazil recognized Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido as the country's interim president, Maduro called Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, quote, a Hitler of the modern era, unquote. Maduro has a strategic partnership with Russian leader Vladimir Putin. After Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, Maduro discussed increasing cooperation with Russia. Due to the raised oil prices resulting from the conflict, diplomatic conversations were initiated between Maduro and U.S. officials suggesting the possibility of easing of U.S. sanctions on Venezuela and improved relations between the two countries. Late in the Biden administration, the U.S. Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control lifted sanctions in October 2023 for 6 months to allow limited trade with the U.S. to resume. During the 2022 United Nations Climate Change Conference in November, multiple world leaders interacted with Maduro, including President of France Emmanuel Macron, Prime Minister of Portugal Antonio Costa, and American John Kerry, with President Macron addressing Maduro as president and stating, quote, I would be happy if we could talk to each other for longer to engage in useful bilateral work for the region, unquote. Days later, on 27 November, the United States eased sanctions on Venezuela and allowed Chevron Corporation to temporarily work with the Venezuelan government. Maduro had made an official state visit to Saudi Arabia in June 2023. He also visited China in September 2023, requesting China's support for Venezuela to join the economic bloc BRICS, and saying he wanted China's investment in Latin America and the Caribbean to increase. Brazil's President Lula da Silva supported Maduro's request to join BRICS. During the visit, Maduro also signed an agreement that included the training of Venezuelan astronauts, expressing his wish to send Venezuelans to the moon. In the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Maduro has frequently supported the Palestinian cause in international forums, declaring that, quote, Jesus Christ was a young Palestinian unjustly crucified by the Spanish Empire, unquote. On 7 November 2023, he condemned Israel's actions in the Gaza Strip during the Gaza War and accused Israel of committing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. Maduro promoted a consultative referendum in Venezuela to support Venezuela's claim to the Essequibo region, which is disputed with and controlled by neighboring Guyana. The referendum took place on 3 December 2023, and a large majority voted in favor of Venezuela's claims, though it had a low turnout. The referendum was one of the contributing factors for the Guyana-Venezuela crisis. In June 2025, Maduro condemned Israeli attacks on Iran, describing it as a criminal assault that violates international law and the United Nations Charter, and accused France, Germany, Britain, and the U.S. of supporting the 21st century Hitler against the noble and peaceful Iranian people. Assassination attempts. Maduro has faced numerous attempts at his life during his presidency. In August 2018, while giving a speech while commemorating the 81st anniversary of the Bolivarian National Guard and addressing soldiers in front of the Centro Simón Bolívar Towers and Palacio de Justicia de Caracas, 2 drones detonated explosives near Avenida Bolívar, Caracas. The Venezuelan government claims the event was a targeted attempt to assassinate Maduro, though the cause and intention of the explosions is debated. Others have suggested the incident was a false flag operation designed by the government to justify repression of opposition in Venezuela. In September 2024, the Venezuelan police captured and arrested 3 Americans, 2 Spaniards, and a Czech national carrying sniper rifles and other munitions to allegedly assassinate Maduro. In a public statement, the Minister of the Interior, Justice and Peace, Diosdado Cabello, held the CIA and Spanish intelligence responsible for the coup attempt, calling it not surprising. The minister shared that they had arrested yet another U.S. military active duty member, Wilbur Joseph Castañeda, with evidence from his cell phone linking him to terrorist attacks during the 2024 Venezuelan presidential election. Controversies. Disputed presidency. With widespread condemnation, President Maduro was sworn in on 10 January 2019. Minutes after he took the oath, the Organization of the American States approved a resolution declaring his presidency illegitimate and calling for new elections. The National Assembly invoked a state of emergency, and some nations removed their embassies from Venezuela, with Colombia and the United States saying Maduro was converting Venezuela into a de facto dictatorship. The president of the National Assembly, Juan Guaido, was declared interim president on the 23 January 2019. The US, Canada, Brazil, and several Latin American countries supported Guaido as interim president the same day. Russia, China, and Cuba supported Maduro. As of March 2019, over 50 countries, the OAS, and the Lima Group do not recognize Maduro as the legitimate president of Venezuela. The Supreme Tribunal rejected the National Assembly decisions, while the Supreme Tribunal of Justice of Venezuela in exile welcomed Guaido as interim president. The United States Department of State issued a communication stating that Maduro had used unconstitutional means and a sham electoral system to maintain an unlawful presidency that is not recognized by most of Venezuela's neighbors. Maduro disputed Guaido's claim and broke off diplomatic ties with several nations who recognized Guaido's claim. Maduro's government states that the crisis is a coup d'etat led by the United States to topple him and control the country's oil reserves. Dictatorship accusations. Maduro has been accused of authoritarian leadership since he took office in 2013. After the opposition won the 2015 parliamentary elections, the lame duck National Assembly, consisting of pro-Maduro Bolivarian officials, filled the Supreme Tribunal of Justice with Maduro allies. The New York Times reported that Venezuela was moving closer to one-man rule. In 2016, the Supreme Tribunal refused to acknowledge the democratically elected National Assembly's attempts to recall Maduro, and the words dictator and authoritarianism began to appear. Foreign Affairs wrote of a full-on dictatorship. Javier Corrales wrote in America's Quarterly that Venezuela was transitioning to a full dictatorship, and OAS General Secretary Luis Almagro said that Maduro was becoming a dictator. After election officials closely aligned with the government blocked an attempt to summon a recall referendum against Maduro, Venezuelan political analysts cited The Guardian warned of authoritarianism and dictatorship. The Supreme Tribunal took over the legislative powers of the National Assembly in March, provoking the 2017 Venezuelan constitutional crisis. A Corrales opinion piece in the Washington Post asked, "What happens next for the dictatorship of President Nicolás Maduro?" With the 2017 Constituent National Assembly poised to declare itself the governing body of Venezuela, the United States Department of the Treasury sanctioned President Maduro, labeled him a dictator, and prevented him from entering the United States. Chilean President Sebastián Piñera also labeled Maduro a dictator. Human Rights Watch described the process that had led to the National Assembly's being taken over, labeled Venezuela a dictatorship, and said the Venezuelan government is tightening its stranglehold on the country's basic institutions of democracy at a terrifying speed, unquote. The Financial Times published an article, quote, sending a message to Venezuela's dictatorship, discussing international censure of Nicolás Maduro, Venezuela's thuggish president, unquote. The Chicago Tribune editorial board wrote an opinion that, quote, the Trump administration should harbor no illusions about Maduro, who appears bent on assuming the mantle of dictator, unquote. Vox Media published an opinion entitled How Venezuela Went from a Rich Democracy to a Dictatorship on the Brink of Collapse. The Economist Intelligence Unit stated that during Maduro's presidency, the country's democracy deteriorated further, with a 2017 report downgrading Venezuela from a hybrid regime to an authoritarian regime, the lowest category with an index of 3.87, the second lowest in Latin America along with Cuba. Reflecting Venezuela's continued slide towards dictatorship, as the government has sidelined the opposition-dominated National Assembly, jailed or disenfranchised leading opposition politicians, and violently suppressed opposition protests. Venezuelan presidential elections were held prematurely in May 2018. The New York Times printed a news piece about the elections, headlining the word dictator. Critics say he can't beat a dictator. This Venezuelan thinks he can. Miguel Angel Latouche, a political science professor at Central University of Venezuela, wrote an opinion piece entitled Venezuela is Now a Dictatorship. And CNN reported that U.S. Republicans were using the term Venezuelan dictator to describe a Democratic candidate. Roger Noriega wrote in the Miami Herald that a lawless regime and narco-dictatorship headed by Maduro, Tarek El Aissami and Diosdado Cabello had driven Venezuela to the brink of collapse. The 10 January 2019 second inauguration of Nicolás Maduro was widely condemned and led to further commentary that Maduro had consolidated power and become a dictator from the Irish Times, the Council on Foreign Relations, German newspaper Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, and The Economist. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau labeled Maduro an illegitimate dictator responsible for terrible oppression and the humanitarian crisis. The Canadian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Chrystia Freeland, stated that having seized power through fraudulent and anti-democratic elections held on May 20th, 2018, the Maduro regime is now fully entrenched as a dictatorship. Presidents Mauricio Macri of Argentina and Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil condemned what they called Maduro's dictatorship. Univision announcer Jorge Ramos described his detention following a live interview of Maduro, saying that if Maduro does not release the seized video of the interview, quote, he is behaving exactly like a dictator, unquote. In an interview with Telemundo, U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders stated, quote, of course Maduro is a dictator, unquote. Reporter Kenneth Raposa wrote an opinion piece for Forbes with the title, Basically Everyone Now Knows Venezuela is a Dictatorship. Birthplace and nationality. Maduro's birthplace and nationality have been questioned several times, with some placing doubt that he could hold the office of the presidency, given that Article 227 of the Venezuelan Constitution states that, quote, to be elected as president of the republic, it is required to be Venezuelan by birth, to not hold another nationality, to be over 30 years old, to not be a member of the clergy, to not be subject to a court conviction, and to meet the other requirements in this constitution, unquote. After his triumph in the 2013 presidential elections, opposition deputies warned that they would investigate the double nationality of Maduro. By 2014, official declarations by the Venezuelan government shared 4 different birthplaces of Maduro. Táchira State's governor, Jose Vielma Mora, assured that Maduro was born in El Palotal sector of San Antonio del Táchira, and that he had relatives that live in the towns of Capacho and Rubio. The opposition deputy, Abelardo Diaz, reviewed the civil registry of El Valle, as well as the civil registry referenced by Vielma Mora, without finding any proof or documentation that could confirm Maduro's birthplace. In June 2013, 2 months after assuming the presidency, Maduro claimed in a press conference in Rome that he was born in Caracas, in Los Chaguarmos, in San Pedro Parish. During an interview with a Spanish journalist, also in June 2013, Elias Hawa claimed that Maduro was born in El Valle Parish in the Libertador municipality of Caracas. In October 2013, Tibisay Lucena, head of the National Electoral Council, assured the Globovisión TV show Vladimir a la that Maduro was born in La Candelaria Parish in Caracas, showing copies of the registry presentation book of all the newborns the day when allegedly Maduro was born. In April 2016, during a cadena nacional, Maduro changed his birthplace narrative once more, saying that he was born in Los Chaguaramos, specifically in Valle Abajo, adding that he was baptized in the San Pedro Church. In 2016, a group of Venezuelans asked the National Assembly to investigate whether Maduro was Colombian in an open letter addressed to the National Assembly President Henry Ramos Alup that justified the request by the reasonable doubts that there are quote reasonable doubts there are around the true origins of Maduro because to date he has refused to show his birth certificate, unquote. The 62 petitioners, including former Ambassador Diego Aria, businessman Marcel Grenier, and opposition former military, assuring that according to the Colombian Constitution, Maduro is Colombian by birth for being the son of a Colombian mother and for having resided in the neighboring country during his childhood. The same year, several former members of the Electoral Council sent an open letter to Tibisay Lucena requesting to exhibit publicly, in a printed media of national circulation, the documents that certify the strict compliance with Articles 41 and 227 of the Constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, that is to say, the birth certificate and the certificate of Venezuelan nationality by birth of Nicolás Maduro Moros, in order to verify if he is Venezuelan by birth and without another nationality. The document mentions that the current president of the CNE incurs in a, quote, a serious error and even an irresponsibility when she affirms that Maduro's nationality is not a motto of the National Electoral Council, unquote. And the signatories also refer to the 4 different moments in which different politicians have awarded 4 different places of birth as official. Diario Las Americas claimed to have to the birth inscriptions of Teresa de Jesus Moros, Maduro's mother, and Mario Moros, his uncle, both registered in the parish church of San Antonio of Cucuta, Colombia. Opposition deputies have assured that the birth certificate of Maduro must say that he is the son of a Colombian mother, which would represent proof that confirms that the president has double nationality and that he cannot hold any office under Article 41 of the Constitution. Deputy Dennis Fernandez Solorzano has headed a special commission that investigates the origins of the president and has declared that Maduro's mother is a Colombian citizen and that the Venezuelan head of state would also be Colombian. The researcher, historian, and former deputy Walter Marquez declared months after the presidential elections that Maduro's mother was born in Colombia and not in Rubio, Táchira. Marquez also declared that Maduro was quote, born in Bogota, according to the verbal testimonies of people who knew him as a child in Colombia and the documentary research we did, and that there are more than 10 witnesses that corroborate this information, 5 of them live in Bogota, unquote. On 28 October 2016, the Supreme Tribunal of Justice issued a ruling stating that according to incontrovertible evidence, it had absolute certainty that Maduro was born in Caracas in the parish of La Candelaria, known then as the Libertador Department of the Federal District, on 23 November 1962. The ruling does not reproduce Maduro's birth certificate. Instead, it quotes a communique signed on 8 June by the Colombian Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Patty Londoño Jaramillo. No related information was found, nor civil registry of birth, nor citizenship card that allows us to infer that President Nicolás Maduro Moros is a Colombian national, unquote. The Supreme Court warned the deputies and the Venezuelans that sowing doubts about the origins of the president may lead to the corresponding criminal, civil, administrative, and, if applicable, disciplinary consequences for attack against the state. On 11 January 2018, the Supreme Tribunal of Justice of Venezuela in exile decreed the nullity of the 2013 presidential elections after lawyer Enrique Aristeguieta Gramco presented evidence about the presumed non-existence of ineligibility conditions of Maduro to be elected and to hold the offices of the presidency. Aristeguieta argued in the appeal that under Article 96, Section B of the Political Constitution of Colombia, Nicolás Maduro Moros, even in the unproven case of having been born in Venezuela, is Colombian by birth because he is the son of a Colombian mother and by having resided in that territory during his youth. The Constitutional Chamber admitted the demand and requested the presidency and the Electoral Council to send a certified copy of the president's birth certificate, in addition to his resignation from Colombian nationality. In March 2018, former Colombian President Andrés Pastrana made reference to the baptism certificate of Maduro's mother, noting that the disclosed document reiterates the Colombian origin of the mother of the president and that therefore Maduro has Colombian citizenship. Conspiracy theories. Maduro continued the practice of his predecessor, Hugo Chavez, of denouncing alleged conspiracies against him or his government. In a period of 15 months following his election, dozens of conspiracies, some supposedly linked to assassination and coup attempts, were reported by Maduro's government. In the same period, the number of attempted coups claimed by the Venezuelan government outnumbered all attempted and executed coups occurring worldwide in the same period. In TV program La Hojilla, Mario Silva, a TV personality of the main state-run channel Venezolana de Televisión, stated in March 2015 that Maduro had received about 13 million psychological attacks. Observers say that Maduro uses such conspiracy theories as a strategy to distract Venezuelans from the root causes of problems facing his government. According to American news publication Foreign Policy, Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez, quote, relied on his considerable populist charm, conspiratorial rhetoric, and his prodigious talent for crafting excuses, unquote, to avoid backlash from troubles Venezuela was facing, with Foreign Policy further stating that for Maduro, quote, the appeal of reworking the magic that once saved his mentor is obvious, unquote. Andrés Cañizales, a researcher at the Andrés Bello Catholic University, said that as a result of the lack of reliable mainstream news broadcasting, most Venezuelans stay informed via social networking services, and fake news and internet hoaxes have a higher impact in Venezuela than in other countries. In early 2015, the Maduro government accused the United States of attempting to overthrow him. The Venezuelan government performed elaborate actions to respond to such alleged attempts and to convince the public that its claims were true. The reactions included the arrest of Antonio Ledesma in February 2015, placing travel restrictions on American tourists and holding military marches and public exercises for the first time in Venezuela's democratic history. After the United States ordered sanctions to be placed on 7 Venezuelan officials for human rights violations, Maduro used anti-U.S. rhetoric to bump up his approval ratings. However, according to Venezuelan political scientist Isabella Picon, only about 15% of Venezuelans believed in the alleged coup attempt accusations at the time. In 2016, Maduro again claimed that the United States was attempting to assist the opposition with a coup attempt. On 12 January 2016, the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Luis Almagro, threatened to invoke the Inter-American Democratic Charter, an instrument used to defend democracy in the Americas when threatened, when opposition National Assembly members were barred from taking their seats by the Maduro-aligned Supreme Court. Human rights organizations such as Human Rights Watch and the Human Rights Foundation called for the OAS to invoke the Democratic Charter. After more controversies and pursuing a recall on Maduro, on 2 May 2016, opposition members of the National Assembly met with the OAS officials to ask for the body to implement the Democratic Charter. 2 days later, on 4 May, the Maduro government called for a meeting the next day with the OAS, with Venezuelan Foreign Minister Delcy Rodriguez stating that the United States and the OAS were attempting to overthrow Maduro. On 17 May 2016, in a national speech, Maduro called OAS Secretary General Luis Almagro a traitor and stated that he worked for the CIA. Almagro sent a letter rebuking Maduro and refuting the claim. The Trump administration described Maduro's government as a dictatorship. When meeting with Latin American leaders during the 72nd session of the UN General Assembly, U.S. President Donald Trump discussed possible United States military intervention in Venezuela, to which they all denied the offer. Maduro's son, Nicolás Maduro Guerra, stated during the 5th Constituent Assembly of Venezuela session that if the United States were to attack Venezuela, quote, "The rifles would arrive in New York, Mr. Trump. We would arrive and take the White House," unquote. Michael Shifter, president of the Inter-American Dialogue think tank, said, quote, "A military action of the United States against Venezuela would be contrary to the movements of the Trump administration to retire troops from Syria or Afghanistan," unquote. John Bolton declared that, quote, "All options are on the table, but has also said that our objective is a peaceful transfer of power," unquote. Censorship. During Maduro's first tenure, between 2013 and 2018, 115 media outlets were shut down, including 41 print outlets, 65 radio outlets, and 9 television channels. During the first 7 months of 2019, the Press and Society Institute of Venezuela found at least 350 cases of violations of freedom of expression. Since the beginning of the presidential crisis, Venezuela has been exposed to frequent information blackouts, periods without access to the internet or other news services during important political events. Since January, the National Assembly and Guaido's speeches are regularly disrupted, television channels and radio programs have been censored, and many journalists were illegally detained. The Venezuelan Press Workers Union reported that in 2019, 40 journalists had been arrested unlawfully as of 12 March. As of June 2019, journalists have been denied access to 7 sessions of the National Assembly by the National Guard. The state controls most Venezuelan television channels, and information unfavorable to the government is not covered completely. Newspapers and magazines are scarce, as most cannot afford paper to print. The underfunded web infrastructure has led to slow internet connection speeds. The information blackouts have promoted the creation of underground news coverage that is usually broadcast through social media and instant message services like WhatsApp. The dependence of Venezuelans on social media has also promoted the spread of disinformation and pro-Maduro propaganda. Venezuela's rank on the World Press Freedom Index of Reporters Without Borders has dropped 42 places since 2013. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights has made a call to the Maduro administration to reestablish TV and radio channels that have been closed, cease the restrictions on internet access, and protect the rights of journalists. Human rights. A board of independent experts, designated by the Organization of American States, published a 400-page report in 2018 that alleged that crimes against humanity have been committed in Venezuela during Maduro's presidency. The board concluded that Maduro could be responsible for dozens of murders, thousands of extrajudicial executions, more than 12,000 cases of arbitrary detentions, more than 290 cases of torture, attacks against the judiciary, and a state-sanctioned humanitarian crisis affecting hundreds of thousands of people. In February 2018, the International Criminal Court announced that it would open preliminary probes into the alleged crimes against humanity performed by Venezuelan authorities. On 27 September 2018, 6 states parties to the Rome Statute, Argentina, Canada, Colombia, Chile, Paraguay, and Peru, referenced the situation in Venezuela since 12 February 2014 to the ICC, requesting the prosecutor Facto Bensouda to initiate an investigation on crimes against humanity allegedly committed in the territory. The following day, the presidency assigned the situation to pretrial Chamber 1. In March 2019, the Wall Street Journal reported in an article entitled, quote, "Maduro loses grip on Venezuela's poor, a vital source of his power," unquote, that barrios are turning against Maduro and that many blame government brutality for the shift. Foro Penal said that 50 people, mostly in barrios, had been killed by security forces in only the first 2 months of the year, and 653 had been arrested for protesting or speaking against the government. Kofovic, a victims' rights group, estimated 3,717 extrajudicial killings in the past 2 years, mostly of suspected criminals in barrios. In April 2019, the U.S. Department of State alleged that Venezuela, led by Nicolás Maduro, has consistently violated the human rights and dignity of its citizens and driven a once prosperous nation into an economic ruin with his authoritarian rule, and that Maduro's thugs have engaged in extrajudicial killings and torture, taken political prisoners, and severely restricted freedom of speech, all in a brutal effort to retain power. The State Department reported highlighted abuse by the nation's security forces, including a number of deaths, the suspicious death of opposition politician Fernando Albán Salazar, the detention of Roberto Marrero, and repression of demonstrators during Venezuelan protests, which left at least 40 dead in 2019. The third and last of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights addressed extrajudicial executions, torture, enforced disappearances, and other rights violations allegedly committed by Venezuelan security forces in recent years. The High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet expressed her concerns for the shockingly high number of extrajudicial killings and urged the dissolution of the FAES. According to the report, 1,569 cases of executions as a result of resistance to authority were registered by the Venezuelan authorities from 1 January to 19 March. Other 52 deaths that occurred during 2019 protests have been attributed to colectivos. The report also details how the Venezuelan government has aimed at neutralizing, repressing, and criminalizing political opponents and people critical of the government since 2016. A report by the human rights advocacy group Human Rights Watch reported in September 2019 that the poor communities in Venezuela no longer in support of Maduro's government have witnessed arbitrary arrests and extrajudicial executions at the hands of Venezuelan police unit. The Venezuelan government has repeatedly denied that the victims were armed criminals who had died during confrontations. Still, several witnesses for families of victims have challenged these claims, and in many cases, victims were last seen alive in police custody. Although Venezuelan authorities told the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights that 5 FAES agents were convicted on charges including attempted murder for crimes committed in 2018, and that 388 agents were under investigation for crimes committed between 2017 and 2019. The OHCHR has also reported that, quote, institutions responsible for the protection of human rights, such as the Attorney General's Office, the courts, and the Ombudsperson, usually do not conduct prompt, effective, thorough, independent, impartial, and transparent investigations into human rights violations and other crimes committed by state actors, bring perpetrators to justice, and protect victims and witnesses, unquote. The government made 3 times more observations than the number of recommendations included in the UN report, and at the same time included false or incomplete claims. On 14 December 2020, the Office of the Prosecutor released a report on the office's year activities, stating that it believed there was a reasonable basis to think that since at least April 2017, civilian authorities, members of the armed forces, and pro-government individuals have committed the crimes against humanity, and that it expected to decide in 2021 whether to open an investigation or not. On 4 November 2021, ICC prosecutor Karim Khan announced the opening of an investigation regarding the situation in Venezuela. The Venezuelan human rights organization Provia has identified more than 43,000 people whose right to personal integrity has been violated since Maduro took office in 2013, including 1,652 people who were tortured, 7,309 people who were subjected to cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment or punishment, and at least 28 people who were killed in the country's prisons. Judicial independence. On 16 September 2021, the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on Venezuela released its second report on the country's situation, concluding that the independence of the Venezuelan justice system under Maduro has been deeply eroded to the extent of playing an important role in aiding the state repression and perpetuating state impunity for human rights violations. The document identified frequent due process violations, including the use of pretrial detention as a routine rather than an exceptional measure, and judges sustaining detentions or charges based on manipulated or fabricated evidence. Evidence obtained through illegal means, and evidence obtained through coercion or torture. In some of the reviewed cases, the judges also failed to protect torture victims, returning them to detention centers where torture was denounced. Despite having heard victims, sometimes bearing visible injuries consistent with torture, make the allegation in court. The report also concluded that prosecutorial and judicial individuals at all levels witnessed or experienced external interference in decision-making, and that several reported receiving instructions either from the judicial or prosecutorial hierarchy or from political officials on how to decide cases. Alleged drug trafficking and money laundering incidents. Narco Sobrinos incident. Two nephews of Maduro's wife, Efrain Antonio Campo Flores and Francisco Flores de Freitas, were found guilty in a U.S. court of conspiracy to import cocaine in November 2016, with some of their funds possibly assisting Maduro's presidential campaign in the 2013 Venezuelan presidential election, and potentially for the 2015 Venezuelan parliamentary elections, with the funds mainly used to help their family stay in power. One informant stated that the two often flew out of Terminal 4 of Simon Bolivar Airport, a terminal reserved for the president. After Maduro's nephews were apprehended by the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration for the illegal distribution of cocaine on 10 November 2015, carrying diplomatic passports, Maduro posted a statement on Twitter criticizing attacks and imperialist ambushes, saying the fatherland will continue on its path. Diosdado Cabello, a senior official in Maduro's government, was quoted as saying the arrests were a kidnapping by the United States. On 18 November 2016, the two nephews were found guilty, with the cash allegedly destined to help their family stay in power. On 14 December 2017, the two were sentenced to 18 years of imprisonment. In October 2022, Maduro's nephews were freed in a prisoner swap for 7 American directors of the oil refinery corporation Citgo, part of the Citgo Six, who were imprisoned in Venezuela. Sanctions against Tarek al-Aissami and Diosdado Cabello. Ex-Venezuelan Vice President Tarek el-Aissami, who served Maduro from 2017 to 2018, is under U.S. sanctions for drug trafficking and aiding state terrorism. He is accused by the U.S. State Department of aiding sanctioned Iran-backed terrorist organizations, including Hezbollah and Quds Force. He is also accused of having ties with various illicit organizations, including Los Zetas and Cartel of the Suns. On 18 May 2018, the Office of Foreign Assets Control of the United States Department of the Treasury placed sanctions in effect against high-level official Diosdado Cabello. OFAC stated that Cabello and others used their power within the Bolivarian government to personally profit from extortion, money laundering, and embezzlement, with Cabello allegedly directing drug trafficking activities with Venezuelan Vice President Tarek el-Aissami while dividing drug profits with President Maduro. U.S. indictment of Maduro. On 26 March 2020, the United States Department of Justice charged Maduro and other Venezuelan officials and some Colombian former FARC members for what Attorney General William Barr described as narco-terrorism, the shipping of cocaine to the U.S. to wage a health war on U.S. citizens. According to Barr, Venezuelan leaders and the FARC faction organized an air bridge from a Venezuelan airbase transporting cocaine to Central America and a sea route to the Caribbean. The U.S. government offered $15 million for any information that would lead to his arrest. Nicolás Maduro has frequently denied any ties to a drug trafficking syndicate. Reward increases. After Maduro was inaugurated for a third term on 10 January 2025, the U.S. State Department announced that the reward against Maduro was increased from $15 million to $25 million. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said that the decision to raise the bounty as part of a concerted message of solidarity with the Venezuelan people meant to further elevate international efforts to maintain pressure on Maduro and his representatives. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that the U.S., quote, does not recognize Nicolás Maduro as the president of Venezuela, unquote, and a U.S. Treasury Undersecretary Bradley Smith added that the U.S. stood with its, quote, like-minded partners in solidarity with the people's vote for new leadership and rejects Maduro's fraudulent claim of victory, unquote. The reward was increased again to $50 million on 7 August 2025, with Attorney General Pam Bondi accusing Maduro of collaborating with foreign terrorist organizations such as Tren de Aragua and the Sinaloa cartel and the Cartel of the Suns to bring deadly violence to the United States. In a video message, Bondi described Maduro as one of the world's most notorious narco-traffickers and a threat to national security, which prompted the reward to be doubled. She concluded, quote, under President Trump's leadership, Maduro will not escape justice, and he will be held accountable for his despicable crimes, unquote, before providing the public with a hotline number to report tips to the Drug Enforcement Administration. In a Fox News interview, Bondi stated that the DOJ had seized approximately $700 million in assets linked to Maduro. The assets allegedly included multiple luxury homes in Florida, a mansion in the Dominican Republic, private jets, vehicles, a horse farm, jewelry, and large sums of cash. Bondi described Maduro's government as an organized crime operation that continued to function despite the seizures. This led to mockery of Bondi and the Trump administration on social media with the phrase, quote, he's in Venezuela, unquote, trending on Twitter. Some users claimed it was a deliberate distraction from the controversy surrounding the Jeffrey Epstein client list. Venezuelan Foreign Minister Iván Gil dismissed the announcement as a crude political propaganda operation, adding that he was not surprised given Bondi's failure to deliver to the client list of the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez dismissed Bondi's allegations as a shameless, accusing her of staging a cardboard cutout performance to continue a ridiculous and cheap show against Maduro. Rodriguez further claimed that Bondi was not in her right mind, suggesting that the Epstein case was keeping her up at night. Maduro, for his part, dared Trump to arrest him during a nationally televised speech and warned American leaders not to even attempt such an action, saying it would provoke a response that could also lead to the end of the American empire. Homophobic statements. As foreign minister, during a 10th anniversary gathering commemorating the 2002 Venezuelan coup d'etat attempt going into the 2012 Venezuelan presidential election, Maduro called opposition members snobs and, quote, little faggots, unquote. During the presidential campaign of 2013, Maduro used anti-gay attacks as a political weapon, calling representatives of the opposition, quote, faggots, unquote. Maduro used anti-gay speech toward his opponent Enrique Capriles, calling him a, quote, little princess, unquote, and saying, quote, I do have a wife, you know, I do like women, unquote. In 2017, Maduro expressed his personal support for same-sex marriage. Hunger crisis. In August 2017, Luis Ortega Diaz, chief prosecutor of Venezuela from 2007 until her sacking in August 2017, accused Maduro of profiting from the shortages in Venezuela. The government operated local committees for supply and production, which provides food to impoverished Venezuelans, made contracts with Group Grand Limited, a company that Ortega said was presumably owned by Nicolás Maduro through frontmen Rodolfo Reyes, Alvaro Uguedo Vargas, and Alex Saab. The Venezuelan government paid Group Grand Limited, a Mexican entity, for basic foods, which it supplied to CLAP. Maduro organized Ortega of working with the United States to damage his government. An April 2019 communication from the United States Department of State highlighting a 2017 National Assembly investigation finding that the government paid $42 for food that cost under $13, and that Maduro's inner circle kept the difference, which totaled more than $200 million in at least one case, adding that food boxes were distributed in exchange for votes. On 18 October 2018, Mexican prosecutors accused the Venezuelan government and Mexican individuals of buying poor quality food products for CLAP and exporting them to Venezuela to double their value for sale. During the Venezuelan presidential crisis, Venezuelan National Assembly President Juan Guaidó said that the Maduro government had plans to steal for humanitarian purposes the products that entered the country, including plans to distribute these products through the government's food distribution program, CLAP. While Venezuelans were affected by hunger and shortages, Maduro and his government officials publicly shared images of themselves eating luxurious meals, images that were met with displeasure by Venezuelans. Despite the majority of Venezuelans losing weight due to hunger, members of the Maduro's administration appeared to gain weight. In November 2017, while giving a lengthy live cadena broadcast, Maduro, unaware he was still being filmed, pulled out an empanada from his desk and began eating it. This occurred amid controversy over Maduro's gaining weight during the nationwide food and medicine shortage, with many on social media criticizing the publicity broadcast incident. In September 2018, Maduro ate one of Salt Bay's luxury restaurants in Istanbul, where he and his wife were served a meat-heavy meal and offered a personalized shirt and box of cigars with Maduro's name engraved. The Wall Street Journal reported that the incident received international criticism and left poor Venezuelans incensed. In December 2018, videos and pictures were leaked showing a glamorous Christmas party that included an expensive feast, including French wine, taking place in the seat of the pro-Maduro Supreme Tribunal of Justice. The images received considerable backlash from social networks, criticizing the cost of the party during the grave economic crisis in the country and the hypocrisy of Maduro's government. Corruption. In an investigative interview with Yuzanando Prazeres de Azevedo, president of Constructora Odebrecht in Venezuela, the executive revealed how Odebrecht paid $35 million to fund Maduro's 2013 presidential campaign if Odebrecht projects would be prioritized in Venezuela. Americo Mata, Maduro's campaign manager, initially asked for $50 million for Maduro, though the final $35 million was settled. Maduro was sentenced to 18 years and 3 months in prison on 15 August 2018 by the Supreme Tribunal of Justice of Venezuela in exile, with the exiled High Court stating, quote, "There is enough evidence to establish the guilt of corruption and legitimation of capital," unquote. The Organization of American States Secretary General Luis Almagro supported the verdict and asked for the Venezuelan National Assembly to recognize the ruling of the Supreme Tribunal in exile. The U.S. State Department issued a fact sheet stating that Maduro's most serious corruption involved embezzlement in which a, quote, European bank accepted exorbitant commissions to process approximately $2 billion in transactions related to Venezuelan third-party money launderers, shell companies, and complex financial products to siphon off funds from PDVSA, unquote. The State Department also alleges that Maduro expelled authorized foreign companies from the mining sector to allow officials to exploit Venezuela's resources for their own gain, using unregulated miners under the control of Venezuela's armed forces. Sanctions. 13 government officials were sanctioned by the United States Department of Treasury due to their involvement with the 2017 Venezuelan Constituent Assembly election. 2 months later, the Canadian government sanctioned members of the Maduro government, including Maduro, preventing Canadian nationals from participating in property and financial deals with him due to the rupture of Venezuela's constitutional order. After the Constituent Assembly election, the United States sanctioned Maduro on 31 July 2017, making him the fourth foreign head of state to be sanctioned by the United States after Bashar al-Assad of Syria, Kim Jong-un of North Korea, and Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe. Secretary of the Treasury Steven Mnuchin stating Maduro is a dictator who disregards the will of the Venezuelan people. Maduro fired back at the sanctions during his victory speech, saying, "I don't obey imperial orders. I'm against the Ku Klux Klan that governs the White House, and I'm proud to feel that way." In March 2018, Maduro was sanctioned by the Panamanian government for his alleged involvement with the money laundering, financing of terrorism, and financing the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Maduro is also banned from entering Colombia. The Colombian government maintains a list of people banned from entering Colombia or subject to expulsion. As of January 2019, the list had 200 people with a close relationship and support for the Nicolás Maduro regime. After the breakdown of the Barbados agreements, he disqualified the pre-candidate Maria Corina Machado through the Supreme Court, similar to the official government. After that, the U.S. sanctions were reapplied under the Biden administration. In September 2024, an Argentine federal court issued an arrest warrant against Maduro and several other Venezuelan officials for crimes against humanity. United States capture and trial. In the pre-dawn hours of 3 January 2026, the United States launched a military operation in Venezuela. A large-scale strike was reportedly carried out, with Trump announcing around 4:20 a.m. EST via social media that Maduro and his wife were captured and flown out of the country. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that Maduro was to stand trial on criminal charges in the United States. Senator Mike Lee stated that Rubio, quote, anticipated no further action in Venezuela now that Maduro is in U.S. custody, unquote. The apprehension was carried out by the U.S. Army's Delta Force. Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez said she did not know Maduro's whereabouts and demanded proof of life. The government of Trinidad and Tobago, which has hosted U.S. military personnel and vessels amid its recent buildup in the Caribbean Sea, stated that it did not participate in the attack. Colombian President Gustavo Petro deployed public forces to the Venezuelan border in anticipation of a mass influx of Venezuelan refugees. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez urged de-escalation, stating that, quote, international law and the principles of the UN Charter must be respected, unquote. This was echoed by EU Foreign Policy Chief and European Commission Vice President Kaja Kallas. The BBC noted the operation was without precedent, with the closest example of similar action being the 1989 capture of Manuel Noriega at the close of the United States invasion of Panama. According to Reuters, Rodriguez was initially reported in Russia at the time of Maduro's capture, though this was later denied. Foreign Minister Ivan Gil stated Nicolás Maduro remains the country's president. Public opinion. In October 2013, Maduro's approval rating stood between 45 and 50%, with Reuters stating that it was possibly due to Hugo Chávez's endorsement. 1 year later, in October 2014, Maduro's approval rating was at 24.5%, according to pollster Data-Analysis. In November 2014, Data-Analysis polls indicated that more than 66% of Venezuelans believe that Maduro should not finish his 6-year term, with government supporters representing more than 25% of those believing that Maduro should resign. In March and April of 2015, Maduro saw a small increase in approval after initiating a campaign of anti-U.S. rhetoric following the sanctioning of 7 officials accused by the United States of participating in human rights violations. During a recall movement gathered from late October through November 2016, a poll by Venezuelan found that 88% of likely voters in a recall would choose to oust Maduro. Among similar polls, Hercon concluded that up to 81.3% of voters responded being willing to recall Maduro, Mega-Analysis that up to 78.3% of respondents disagreed that Maduro continued governing, and Data-Analysis that 75% of Venezuelans considered that Maduro should be recalled. In September 2018, Mega-Analysis polls found that 84.6% of Venezuelans surveyed wanted Maduro and his government to be removed from power. Following the suspension of the recall movement, a Venezuelan poll found that 61.4% found that Maduro had become a dictator, while in a poll taken by Keller and Associates, 63% of those questioned thought that Maduro was a dictator. Before the 2018 presidential elections, the Data-Analysis poll indicated that 16.7% of voters would vote for Maduro as candidate, compared to 27.6% and 17.1% of voters that would choose rival candidates Henri Falcón and Javier Bertucci, respectively. During the presidential crisis, the Wall Street Journal reported that barrios were turning against Maduro in a shift born of economic misery and police violence. Surveys between 30 January and 1 February 2019 by Mega-Analysis recorded that 4.1% of Venezuelans recognized Maduro as president. 11.2% were undecided, and 84.6% of respondents recognized Guaidó as interim president. The study of 1,030 Venezuelans was conducted in 16 states and 32 cities. A separate pollster, Interlaces, ran a poll from 21 January to 2 February 2019 that found that 57% of Venezuelans recognized Maduro as the legitimate president of Venezuela, 32% recognized Guaidó, and 11% were unsure. By 4 March 2019, Data-Analysis poll found that Guaidó's approval at 61% and Maduro's at an all-time low of 14%, with Guaidó winning 77% in a theoretical election with Maduro, who received 23% of support. Data-Analysis found that among the poorest 20% of Venezuelans, Maduro's support had fallen 18% in February 2019 from 40% 2 years earlier. In a May 2019 analysis, Jose Brinceño Ruiz, based on the Mega-Analysis poll and other trends, said that Maduro was extremely unpopular. In February 2023, a year before the 2024 presidential elections, a Datencorp poll found that 15.69% of voters would vote for Maduro as candidate, in contrast to 16.86% that would vote for opposition candidate Maria Corina Machado. In popular culture, Maduro was parodied in the animated web series Isla Presidencial, along with most of the other Latin American leaders, portrayed as a man of limited intelligence, twisted speech, and capable of talking with birds. The latter being a reference to a comment made by Maduro during the 2013 presidential elections when he said that the late Chavez had reincarnated in a little bird and talked to him to bless his candidacy. The 2020 revival of the Animaniac series has featured Maduro mocking him and the hyperinflation in Venezuela. Several documentaries that discuss the Bolivarian Revolution and the crisis in Venezuela, including In the Shadow of the Revolution, Chavismo, the Plague of the 21st Century, El Pueblo Soy Yo, and A la Calle, depict Maduro as well. All right, awards and honors. I am going to skip these. There is going to be a link to the article in the description. You can actually go check these out if you want, find out more about them. Most of them were awarded in 2013, with some exceptions. Let's see. Others. In 2014, Maduro was named as one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people. In the article, it explained that whether or not Venezuela collapses now depends on Maduro, saying it also depends on whether Maduro can step out of the shadow of his pugnacious predecessor and compromise with his opponents. In 2016, the Reporters Without Borders Top 35 Predators of Press Freedom list placed Maduro as a predator to press freedom in Venezuela, with RSF noting his method of carefully orchestrated censorship and economic asphyxiation toward media organizations. In 2016, the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, an international non-governmental organization that investigates crime and corruption, gave President Maduro the Person of the Year award that, quote, recognizes the individual has done the most in the world to advance organized criminal activity and corruption, unquote. The OCCRP stated that they chose Maduro for the Global Award on the strength of his corrupt and oppressive reign, so rife with mismanagement that citizens of his oil-rich nation are literally starving and begging for medicines, and that Maduro and his family steal millions of dollars from government coffers to fund patronage that maintains President Maduro's power in Venezuela. The group also explains how Maduro had overruled the legislative branch filled with opposition politicians, repressed citizen protests, and had relatives involved in drug trafficking. Elections. 2013 presidential election. Maduro won the second presidential election after the death of Hugo Chavez with 50.61% of the votes against the opposition's candidate Enrique Capriles Radonsky, who had 49.12% of the votes. The Democratic Unity Roundtable contested his election as fraud and as a violation of the Constitution. However, the Supreme Court of Venezuela ruled that under Venezuela's Constitution, Maduro is the legitimate president and was invested as such by the Venezuelan National Assembly. 2018 presidential campaign. Maduro was declared as the winner of the 2018 election with 67.8% of the vote. The result was denounced as fraudulent by most neighboring countries, including Argentina, Peña Nieto's Mexico, Chile, Colombia, Brazil, Canada, and the United States, as well as organizations such as the European Union and the Organization of American States, but recognized as legitimate by other neighboring countries such as López Obrador's Mexico, Bolivia, Cuba, Suriname, Nicaragua, and some other ALBA countries, along with South Africa, China, Russia, North Korea, and Turkey. 2024 presidential campaign. Maduro ran for a third consecutive term, while González represented the Unitary Platform, the main opposition political alliance. In June 2023, the Venezuelan government had barred leading candidate Maria Corina Machado from participating. This move was regarded by the opposition as a violation of political human rights and was condemned by international bodies such as the Organization of American States, the European Union, and Human Rights Watch, as well as numerous countries. Academics, news outlets, and the opposition provided strong evidence showing that González won the election by a wide margin, with the opposition releasing copies of official tally sheets collected by poll watchers from a majority of polling centers showing a landslide victory for González. The government-controlled National Electoral Council announced, possibly falsified, the result, claiming a narrow Maduro victory on 29 July. Vote tallies were not provided. The Carter Center was unable to verify the CNE's results, asserting the election failed to meet international democratic election standards. The CNE's results were rejected by the OAS, and the United Nations declared that there was, quote, no precedent in contemporary democratic elections, unquote, for announcing a winner without providing tabulated results. Analyses by media sources found the CNE results statistically improbable and lacking in credibility. Parallel vote tabulation confirmed the win by Gonzalez. Political scientist Stephen Levitsky called the official results, quote, one of the most egregious electoral frauds in modern Latin American history, unquote. Protests occurred across the country and internationally as the Maduro administration initiated Operation Tun-Tun, a crackdown on dissent. Some world leaders rejected the CNE's claimed results and recognized Gonzalez as the election winner, while some other countries, including Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and Cuba, recognized Maduro as the winner. Maduro did not cede power and instead asked the Supreme Tribunal of Justice, composed of justices loyal to Maduro, to audit and approve the results. On 22 August, as anticipated, the TSJ described the CNE's statement of Maduro's winning the election as validated. The Supreme Court ruling was rejected by the United States, the European Union, and 10 Latin American countries. An arrest warrant was issued on 2 September for Gonzalez and for the alleged crimes of usurpation of functions, falsification of public documents, instigation to disobey the law, conspiracy, and association, according to Reuters. After seeking asylum in the Spanish embassy in Caracas, Gonzalez left for Spain on 7 September. Maduro was sworn in for a third term on 10 January 2025. All right. Also says to see the 2016 state of emergency in Venezuela, the list of presidents of Venezuela, capture of Nicolás Maduro by the United States. So that is Nicolás Maduro. Obviously, there is going to be a lot of updates and changes going on. So if there is anything specific that you see or think that we should cover, do me a favor, drop it down in the comments. I'll see if there is an appropriate article for that, and we will get that into the rotation. But regardless, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your time. As always, I would appreciate if you hit the like button if you appreciate this content. Subscribe here if you want to receive more. And otherwise, thanks for watching. We'll talk to you next time.